Hello audience. As you can see, we're going to work on the engine some more, so let's get started. And we just got the oil pan back, so it's ready to go, so we can finish assembling this. Now, this is an original 1913 oil pan, which I kind of overpaid for it, but in spite of that, they are fairly expensive and fairly rare. So I wanted to do something a little better than a spray can. So this is painted with two-stage urethane, the same paint formula we're probably going to use on the whole chassis. It's a lot more durable and it looks better. The first time I tried assembling an engine, it was a Model A, and I didn't use any kind of sealer. I just used the gaskets as is because that's the way it was originally and that's the way it should be. And you can imagine what happened. So later on in life, I discovered Permatex Ultra Gray, and I started using it on absolutely everything. And it seals pretty well, but the problem is you can't take anything apart ever again. So what I'm doing now is I'm just putting a little bit of sealer around the parts that are most likely to leak and leaving the rest of it alone. Before installing the oil pan, there's a few things that I do. One old trick some people do is anywhere where there's a seam or there's rivets, they coat it with something to prevent leaking. I used to use JB Weld, but that sometimes cracks and falls apart. So on this one, I'm using Permatex Ultra Gray. I don't know if it's going to work any better, we'll see. And I have the felt seal on it, just like the timing cover. It's been pre-soaked, ready to go. And all these threaded holes, I ran a tap through all of them, so we shouldn't have any trouble with them. Now, like I've said, internally the components on this are 2627 series, and this is a good example of it. The brake drum on the transmission is wider than the 25 and earlier ones. They have more braking surface on them. And the thing to keep in mind with that is also with that year, the oil pan and the transmission housing were clearanced for more room for that. Now you can fit this in an earlier engine. There is room in here, just barely, but there is. However, there's no room for the wider band. Also, the brake pedal shaft was moved slightly further back in 26 to go with the wider band. Now, if you want to benefit from the wider brake band, you pretty much have to have the whole engine and transmission to go with it. I don't care about any of that. I'm just using this transmission because it's already been rebuilt, and I'm just going to put the earlier narrow band on it like I was running it. And here's the new bands. I'm using Kevlar on this one. I'm not going to say that's the greatest band material, but it is really durable. In my experience, even if they're not adjusted right, or even if you don't drive properly, you can still get plenty of years out of them. So that's what I chose. I soaked them in oil overnight, because that's an old trick. I don't know if it's required, but it's not going to hurt. Now, you may remember when I was putting the engine together for the truck, I had a lot of trouble aligning the fourth main on it. So when I got this oil pan, pretty much the first thing I did with it was I checked it to see if it was straight. And the good news is, it is. This just drops right on, and the bolt holes line up. Now, this did have a rebuilt fourth main on it, but you may remember I pirated that for the truck. So I took the old one that was in the truck and exchanged it for a rebuilt one, and that's the one that's going on here. Now, ever since that happened, I've been doing research off and on the fourth main and the alignment of it and how critical it is, and yeah, it actually is quite as critical as I thought it was. Because they do say that if this is too far out of alignment, you can break the crankshaft or it can prematurely wear out the main bearings. Another thing I'll point out is, like I said, this is an earlier oil pan. These are notorious for not being as strong as the later ones. Now, they redesigned them quite a bit around 1917. They have more reinforcing ribs around the bottom, mounting flange is wider and it bends out. So these are quite a bit weaker, but I didn't know just how much weaker they are. Now this one, I don't know if you can see it, but I can actually bend it around in relation to the block by hand, which I can't do with the later ones. And keep in mind, this should be strong enough to hold the transmission in place. Now, this isn't really a fair fight because when you bolt the housing on here, it'll reinforce this, but it is an example of just how much weaker these are. Now, there are aftermarket parts you can bolt onto this to make it more rigid, which I wasn't going to do because I wanted it to look original, but after looking at all this, I'm seriously reconsidering that now. And here's the transmission housing that I've been using, and I'm going to reuse. It's an original 1913 appropriate. It's in pretty good shape, but it could use a good rebuild. The pedals are loose, and the clutch pedal, for some reason, when you push it all the way down, it gets jammed, and you have to force it back up. But I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to throw it on anyway. I'll just have to rebuild it some other time. And that's all assembled. I have the bands pretty much adjusted. I have the fourth main on, the gasket sealer drying, and it's actually looking pretty good. I'm actually quite pleased with the way it's turning out. The next big thing to do would be to install the cylinder head, but the head gasket that I got for it ended up going on the truck. So I ordered another one, and we're just going to have to wait for that. However, one thing I can do is drop this back in the car, and I think I'm going to do that. I should have thought of this earlier. When installing the engine, you have to remove the engine stand adapter first, otherwise it gets in the way of the frame. I got the engine installed and bolted in. It's a few weeks later, I had to go work on something else, but in the meantime, I got more parts and I was able to assemble more of this. So just got to throw a few more things on it and we can try starting it and see what happens. But that'll have to wait for another video. So anyway, that's it for now. So thank you for watching and we'll see you next time.